We'll just give a couple of minutes until everyone joins. Good morning. Welcome to the Westminster Skills Summit. Good morning, all. Welcome to the Westminster Skills Summit. We'll just give a couple of minutes until everyone joins. Welcome. Good morning, all. Welcome to the Westminster Skills Summit. We're just waiting for everyone to join. Great. I think we're ready to start. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Westminster Skills Summit for the last time. Lovely to see you all here. I'm Michelle Rebello. I work for Westminster City Council, and I'll be hosting today's session along with our lovely speakers and panelists. Hopefully, you should all have received an agenda for today. So we'll be here from 10 o'clock till 11:30, and we'll start in any minute. But I would just like to give a couple of a notice on how we're going to run the session today. So you are more than welcome to use the chat function if you'd like now. It's been enabled to do so if you'd like to say who you are, your name and your organization. We will be soon starting with Councillor Jeff Barclough, who will be introducing the session and giving the welcome. We'll then move over to a panel chaired by Jessie Buscombe, our... Sorry, should there be any sound? Oh. There should be sound. There was just someone in the chat. You should be listening to what we are saying. You will not be able to unmute or take your camera off. So please let us know if you're not listening properly in the chat. Can you mute?
Relieved, it's just me.
If you can confirm that you are listening okay. Okay, good. I guess there might be some issue with some laptops. If you're experiencing any issues, you can try and leave the meeting and then come back. We will be admitting people throughout, and the meeting, just rest assured, will be recorded, and we will be sharing the recording afterwards. So for the first part, if you listen to what I've said, the captions are also enabled, so you're also able to check the captions because we've enabled these. So if you were able to listen to what I said just now, if you'd like to introduce yourself over the chat function, the chat will then be disabled when the panel starts, and we will be using the Q&A session. So you're more than welcome to use the Q&A session for any questions, and myself, Juliet and Michael will be responding as we are throughout the event. Right, we are receiving quite a lot of introductions. I would like to pass now to Councillor Jeff Barclough, who will be doing the welcome. Welcome, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Michelle. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for so many of you being here today. I know that online conferences are not as good as the real thing, but we've shortened the agenda and we'll try and keep things interesting and engaging for you this morning. If you're all still here in 90 minutes, I will call that a success. So thanks to Eileen, Michelle and the team at Westminster for rearranging all this at such short notice. And I'd like to welcome particularly Jessie Buscombe, the chair of Westminster's first Education, Employment and Skills Board, the panel members and the representatives of our key growth sectors, creative, construction, hospitality, life sciences and technology, which is the area that I work in. The team have given me 10 minutes. I won't take that long, but let me briefly explain why I'm here and why the Skills Summit fits into our wider vision. Why am I in Westminster? Well, a long time ago when I was a student, I was a student at Warwick, which is about 2 hours drive up what's now the M40. And one evening, some friends of mine had tickets for Ronnie Scott's in Soho, and they got me to drive them to Soho. We parked in Frith Street, saw 2 sessions of Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, had a coffee at Bar Italia, and then drove back on the M40 to Warwick. And I thought, there's no place I'd rather live. This is the centre of the universe, and this is where I want to spend my life. So I moved to Westminster when I graduated. I actually went away for a few years to live on the continent in my 20s, came back, got married, lived in Maida Vale ever since. Why am I a councillor? Because I hadn't been involved in politics until about 2015, when I got made redundant and had time to think about a few things. And they opened a food bank on my street, Elgin Avenue in Maida Vale, where flats sell for £1 million. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I'd rather be part of the solution than part of the problem. So I got elected in 2018. And then in 2022, Labour took control of the council for the first time. And I got the opportunity to put together Westminster's first proper economy plan. And this plan is part of our wider vision for a fairer Westminster designed to deliver good growth that brings benefits for everyone. And our plan goes beyond Westminster's traditional commercial and tourist areas and looks to boost business and employment throughout the borough. There's 3 pillars to the Fair Economy Plan. Firstly, keeping the West End humming as an engine of economic growth for London and the UK. Second, supporting small businesses, particularly in the context of our local high streets, but most importantly, and the reason we're here today, helping our residents get the well-paid jobs with prospects available on their doorstep, because there are large parts of the borough that have been left behind. We want to give our residents the confidence, connections and skills they need to land the well-paid jobs with prospects that are available on their doorstep. And I emphasize well paid because the sad fact is that today work is often no longer a route out of poverty. 60% of families in poverty in Westminster have somebody in work. 2/3 of workers in Westbourne Ward, a short walk from the HQs of Visa and Vodafone in Paddington, earn less than the London living wage. And 30% of Westminster's working age residents are not in employment at all, an unprecedentedly high level with long-term sickness the major reason. This is a waste of talent at a time when the nation needs a productivity boost, and a waste when employers tell me that finding good staff is their biggest challenge. But it's also a public health emergency. Low wages and worklessness explain much of the 10-year life expectancy gap between Harrow Road and Bayswater. So, as a council, we are now taking a strategic approach to breaking the cycle, which people need training for careers of the future, but are often stuck in dead-end jobs with no prospects and no time or money to get the training. That's why we set up the Education, Employment and Skills Board, which is the organiser of today's event, with the objective of getting together Westminster's training providers, funders and employers around the table. And our first task has been to understand the needs of tomorrow's labour market and see where we have gaps with today's workforce and today's training provision. You'll see the research findings in the next presentation. We need to use our convening power, like today, to direct training and skills budgets to deliver the careers advice and qualifications that will get the best outcomes for our residents. And we need to make sure these opportunities reach all parts of our community. That's why we set up the Anchor Alliance, working with our largest employers. I'll give them a shout out because I'm really pleased with their involvement. Grosvenor, London Zoo, British Land, King's College, Microsoft, Octavia Housing, Imperial NHS and the council itself, working together to offer training, work experience and mentoring to people who otherwise wouldn't consider a career in real estate or radiography. And the Alliance has already begun delivering the Makers programme, co-designed to support care leavers aiming to provide young people with the skills to enter and progress in the creative and technical sectors. Of course, we need to make sure the council's own services, adult education and employment, adapt to the changing needs of today's central London economy. The Westminster Adult Education Service is the largest in London, employing 200 staff and training more than 7,000 students each year. One of its key focuses is to grow the provision of green skills to support the increasing demand, for example, for people that can install heat pumps. And this month, we open our Green Skills Innovation Centre, which will offer courses on sustainability and retrofit, ranging from one-day sessions to intensive boot camps, working with the Anchor Alliance to ensure the courses train people for the jobs available today. Which brings us on to this morning's Skills Summit. We've done the initial research and made the connections with you, employers, training providers, business groups and funders. Everyone we speak to wants to help and make this a reality. So that's it from me. I'll relax and listen to the rest of the debate. I'll be back to close the conference in time for you to get back to the day job by 10:30.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much for that. I would like to pass on now to Alexandra Hill, Chief Economist at Westminster City Council.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me today. Really interesting to see all of the kind of the lists of different people we've got coming to this. So I think we've got a huge amount of expertise in the room. I'm just going to share my screen and I'm hoping that's worked. So Michelle, please shout if it's not and you can't see it. The team asked me to do a quick run through of the Westminster economy and labour market. So I had agreed to do that by 20 past. I will do my level best. I had a 10-minute slot. It's quite a lot of material to run through in 10 minutes. So I'm not going to try and go through all of the detail. And I should add that there's quite a lot of really good material out there on a lot of this. So I believe that there was a report carried out for us by Volterra for the Employment Education and Skills Board, which I hope you've all got access to. Really encourage you to try and kind of dip in and have a look at that. But there's also quite a bit that we've also done for the Employment Education and Skills Board and some reports on things like the West End and the state of the economy. So there's lots there. Very happy to share it. As I think Michelle said, we don't have a kind of question session in response to this. There is a Q&A later, which is designed for sort of Jessie and her team, but please let Michelle know if you've got queries, you want to ask anything. I'm sure I can find a way of relaying those. Right, so I'm going to jump straight in. Starting off, now make sure I'm clicking on the right screen. There we go. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of a background on Westminster's economy. This might be really familiar to a lot of you, but I thought it's just really useful to kind of recap over some of the really key stats on our economy. So Westminster generates a GVA, basically economic output, kind of equivalent to GDP really, of 90 billion. So we're second only to the City of London as a local authority. And we're very close to City of London. So a huge amount is generated out of Westminster. We're home to around 50,000 businesses and kind of generates around 800,000 jobs. We make up kind of roughly half of the geography of the Central Activity Zone, which is the kind of key economic activity zone in London, and have a huge amount of the kind of the office space that exists. So there's a huge amount of economic activity. We're service dominated, as you probably expect for central London. So it's about 80% at the national level and 96% within Westminster. And I suppose more importantly, it's a complex economy. So this is a diagram I've lifted from a report we did on the West End, which shows a lot of the different sectors that make up the West End particularly. So there's a lot of the ones you'd expect to see there, like hospitality, accommodation, food services, retail, and of course, arts and culture. But actually, professional services and finance are a really big part of the Westminster economy as well, just perhaps not quite as visible as some of those other ones. Right, I'm going to move on. I'm going to move as quickly as I can. I'm going to come on to try and dive a little bit more into the kind of qualification skills of our residents and the kind of labour market prospects and opportunities. And Jeff touched on a little bit of this. I think what's worth bearing in mind is you can look at the kind of statistics for Westminster as a total, and it hides quite a lot of regional disparity. And as Jeff said, even at the hyper local level, you can see quite a bit of disparity. So when you look kind of local authority wide, we have a relatively sort of skilled workforce with a kind of significant proportion, higher than the London and UK average, of people in skilled professions. But then when you start to look at how that pairs out across different parts of Westminster, you see quite a lot of difference. So I've touched on this particular one in terms of qualifications and the percentage of our residents who don't have any qualifications. So actually, this is around 13% of residents who don't have any qualifications, but the picture looks quite different when you start to look at different parts of Westminster. And I've included the sort of highest ranking and lowest ranking electoral wards to give you a flavour of how much difference you start to see when you look at different parts of Westminster. And actually, we see a very similar picture when we look at other skills levels. So I've chosen this particular statistic, but you see a similar pattern. And we see something similar when we're thinking about things like unemployment. So unemployment is around 5% Westminster wide, a little bit higher than the UK, but broadly similar to London. But that starts to vary quite a bit when you look at different parts of our geography. And we have kind of about 25% of our unemployed residents are in the north of Westminster, in our North Paddington wards. And I suppose the final thing to touch on is that qualifications and skills are obviously a really important part of this, but half our unemployed residents have a level 4 qualification. So there's something about skills match and having the right skills and qualifications for the roles that we have. And the final point that I just wanted to add on that part was that, as Jeff mentioned, economic inactivity is a problem for us in the way that it is a problem for the whole of the UK at the moment. But for our residents in the north of Westminster, kind of being long-term sick and disabled seems to be a much bigger driver of economic activity. The data is very problematic in this at the national level, and it gets more difficult at the local level, but that definitely seems to be the emerging picture. In the last bit of this, I'm going to touch on a little bit of the outlook, some of the things that have changed quite recently, and then I will touch very briefly on sectors, but there's a section in the agenda later on to do some of that. So I'll avoid, duplicating what might be in some of that. And I think with this, really, I'm not going to run through every part of this slide. I think anyone who's maybe looked at a newspaper or a news outlet will be aware of some of the sort of challenging economic conditions the UK is in at the moment, but that also the global economy is in, with quite a lot of geopolitical uncertainty and uncertainty over things like tariffs. And, Westminster, London, the UK is not immune from that. That being said, I do think there is some evidence that London is faring a little bit better. And I have seen kind of data and statistics on the fact that there is employment growth planned in London generally. So, there is an extent to which London, as it usually is going to be insulated from some of these things, but won't be completely. Another thing I did want to tease out particularly, which was some research I saw quite recently, was on the graduate labour market. And I know we've got a lot of education institutions who have a particular interest in this, and I'm sure lots of interesting perspectives and expertise. But I've seen growing evidence of a sort of a challenge in the graduate labour market. So some of the statistics I saw were on as much of a fifth in fall in graduate openings in London in 2024. And that possibly combined with a kind of greater competition is creating quite a high rate of competition for those graduate openings. So some Institute for Student Employees research I saw suggested as many as 140 applications per vacancy. And I think this means that there is a risk of kind of mismatch of qualifications with roles. And I think there's an OECD report which suggests that as many as a third of employees in England generally are overqualified for the role they've got, given kind of the qualifications they're receiving and the openings. I've mentioned automation and AI there as well. And I think that's an area where I understand, there's evidence that suggests that kind of graduate roles are potentially graduate white collar jobs are particularly at risk with AI and automation. So I'm going to come on to my final slide now. So a bit of a sector overview. We've done lots of work looking at sectors. The Volterra report includes lots of detail, and we've got lots of sector experts in this group. So I'm not going to endeavour to try and explain their sectors better than them, but I did want to touch on the fact that given we have a mixture of sectors in Westminster, the picture is not uniform across all of them. So I think some of the data that we've looked at suggests that for some of our sectors where we employ a lot of Westminster residents, particularly Westminster residents who might be lower qualified or lower earning, in potentially in some of our kind of retail and hospitality sectors. And those are sectors which I think have struggled particularly with rising labour costs and other things, but also kind of recovery post-pandemic. But also there are some opportunity sectors, and I know Jeff mentioned a lot of our growth sectors. One I wanted to pick out because it's one we've been looking at recently for some of our work on the state of the economy is the low carbon and environmental goods sector. There's a report that's been carried out by the GLA looking London-wide at this sector, and there's some quite interesting findings about the growth of this sector. Westminster is quite dominant in this sector, so we're really, in terms of the size across London, second only to the city. And once you strip out carbon finance, we're actually the biggest. So there's lots of opportunities within this sector. There's lots of different parts of it. There's kind of property, lower carbon technologies, lots of different aspects to it. And as you've seen from the table I've included, it's growing in terms of sales, kind of companies and employment. So that's another area that I think we should keep looking at and keep exploring, and Jeff touched on that. That brings me to the end of my presentation. I think I've kind of kept my 10 minutes, but I know we're a couple of minutes over. I'm going to hand back to Michelle, who I think will introduce the next session. But just wanted to say again, thank you very much for having me, and very happy if we can find a mechanism for making it work now we're all online. Very happy to take any questions or queries people might have. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. That was very good. Thank you very much. I would like now to introduce Jessie Buscombe, our Education, Employment and Skills Board Chair, who will be introducing the panel discussion.
Thank you, Michelle. Just checking you couldn't hear me all right, because I know we've had some sound issues. All good? I will kick off then. Well, great to see everyone online. Like Jeff, I was hoping to see everyone in person, and I don't know about the rest of you, but having a 4-day tube strike has brought back some memories of COVID and being slightly constrained in my little corner of London, which perhaps actually leads me on to just say something about my connection to Westminster, following on from Jeff's very intriguing story, which I wanted to kind of dig in more to, about his youthful days in Westminster. So my connection with this borough goes even further back, in that I was actually born in the borough. So I was born in Paddington, and I grew up in the northwest of the borough, in an area that was just highlighted in the previous slides, Queen's Park, most of which is in Westminster, but some of it nudges into Brent. And I'm always really struck when the slides around deprivation are brought up, how much that area codes red. And that is
question, Aidan.
That's red based, I think, on really quite a long-standing story of deprivation in a certain part of our borough. And to me, kind of growing up in that area, I was really struck by, I think, those of us who were able to get the right kind of skills and training. And for me, that was a pathway through school into A-levels and into university. But for others, a very dear friend of mine, that was vocational training and going into the health service, how much the right training actually enabled us to have the kind of careers that we find fulfilling and rewarding. And that's kind of brought me to speak to this panel today. But for not all of my friends and residents, that was a potential opportunity, and not all of my friends and neighbours found the right routes into training. And that really affected their life chances and their economic prospects, and it still does. So when this opportunity came up to chair this board, which is a voluntary position, I really jumped at that. And as you may have seen, if you've kind of looked me up or read my profile, it coincides with a long history I have of working within the skills sector, and previously that was within central government, and going sort of further back, some of the organisations that were set up to fund vocational training and learning. So I come to this, I guess, position with both that personal experience and professional experience. And I just want to say just a little bit about the work of the Skills Board and what we've been set up to do. And I'm really delighted that I've got some of my fellow board members both on the panel with me today, but also more widely just joining the event today. So I hope we can have a really inclusive conversation with everyone who's joined the event today, and with my board members about how we make this work for Westminster. So the Skills Board, as Jeff said, was set up, I think 18 months ago now, really with the remit of looking at whether the skills provision that we fund in the borough is actually helping the residents of the borough access higher quality work. And we know, as Jeff said, that training actually leads to better employment outcomes. So, for instance, for individuals taking on an apprenticeship, there are significantly higher earnings potential than those who have not taken a measurable form of vocational qualification. So we know it matters. But one of the long-standing issues for Westminster and for other areas has been, how do we really ensure that the training that we fund, given limited, and there's always going to be limited public budgets, actually helps support people get into the relevant employment that is both right for them, but also right for businesses in the borough. So as mentioned, and I hope we can share the report in the chat if people haven't seen this already, we wanted an independent look at the situation in the borough as regards what we were funding through a range of training providers who I know are joining us today, further education colleges and community organisations, and then what were also the needs of employers in the borough. So that's both looking at existing employment opportunities, some of the key sectors in the borough, whether that's hospitality, creative and cultural, but also some of the growth and new sectors. So looking at the impact of AI, looking at the impact of the needs of net zero and green jobs in the borough. So what could we do also for younger people who are going to be qualifying in a very different employment market than I came into? So that's been really the background behind our work, and I'm absolutely delighted to have I would say a sort of even more expert panel than my experience, and I'm really keen to get their insight into this agenda. So joining me today to have a really facilitated conversation about how we can make this work for the borough. First of all, I'm delighted to welcome Anne-Marie Soyinka, who is Assistant Director of Skills and Employment Policy at the Greater London Authority. Secondly, on the call, I'm also delighted to have Aranola Ide, who is the Principal of Westminster Adult Education Service, really leading the efforts to deliver skills intervention in the borough. Thirdly, I'm also joined by Kate Nottage, Social Impact Director of the Grosvenor Property Group, a key employer and developer within our borough. And finally, also one of my board members, Oliver Latham, who is Vice President Strategy and Growth at Pearson, who has been very supportive in terms of working across the board around and using his expertise around the knowledge of profiling skills needs. So given this has moved online, I'm not going to attempt to cover the background of each of my panelists' organisations in detail, because I felt that would lead a very long session from you hearing from me, and I would like to quickly move over to hearing from my panelists. So what I'm actually going to ask my panelists to do is to give a fuller introduction to their role and the work that they have been doing in Westminster. And I'm also going to ask, I've got a cheeky opening question, which is I'm going to ask them, what is one skill you've been working on yourself at work? And I'm going to do this alphabetically. So if I've got my alphabet right, I'm going to start with Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie, can I pass over to you?
Sure. Thanks. Try to remember everything that I meant to cover. My job title is Assistant Director for Skills and Employment Policy at the Greater London Authority. And what that means in practice is really looking at how to make the kind of skills and employment system for London work as effectively as it can in supporting all Londoners into good work. And so a lot of that at the moment is through the development of our inclusive talent strategy, which I'll probably talk about a bit later as part of the panel discussion. But it's I sit on the board for the Westminster Employment and Skills Board, and I think my role as part of that has really been looking at how we can align what's going on locally within Westminster and the challenges that we're identifying at a local level to what we're doing at a pan-London level, and looking at how we can make those links clearer, how we can support each other in that policy development, and make sure that we're making the best and most effective use of our joint resources. In terms of a skill that I've been developing recently, I would say strategic influence, because a lot of the work that I do relates to provision that I don't necessarily have control over. And so it's really looking at how we can work together, how we can, how I can learn from what my stakeholders are saying, what our delivery partners and our key strategic partners are saying, and translate that into the policy that we're developing, but also make sure that our policy is influencing what's happening at a local level. And so that involves a lot of listening to stakeholders, interpreting, understanding, and sharing what we're doing, and in a way where people can understand how it relates to them. So hopefully that's useful.
Really useful. Thank you, Anne-Marie. And that skill resonates with me also. Arinola, if I could pass over to you next.
Thanks, Jessie. And good morning, everyone. Absolutely delighted to be here. As has been indicated, I head up the Council's Adult Education Service. We are the largest in London, probably second or third largest in the country. And my role really as principal of Westminster Adult Education Service is to ensure that our provision is meeting the needs of our residents, but also, we are funded by the Greater London Authority, and also making sure that those wider Londoners who access, either because their preferred place of study is Westminster, or actually that's the most convenient place for them to actually study. But in terms of looking at making sure that offer is meeting the needs of our residents, it's also making sure that's aligning to what our businesses need. So working with a wide range of employers, I think Jeff mentioned the Anchor Alliance. Myself and my team have made connections with a number of the organisations with the Anchor Alliance. Again, just to ensure that we're understanding what's needed now, but also not just thinking about that short-term aspect, but what's needed longer term, so that we can not just prepare our residents for the jobs now, but also for the jobs for the future. But also making sure that we're not just cherry picking, and we're identifying where those opportunities might be to work with our local businesses, work with our community and voluntary sector. So the work that we do is quite wide ranging. So there's a skills aspect to it, but there's also a learning aspect to it, just to make sure that people are equipped to continue to learn throughout life. We are all in support of lifelong learning, which we feel will put people in a better position to actually improve their life chances and that of their families. In terms of a skill I've been working on, probably a bit similar to Anne-Marie's actually, systems thinking. So systems thinking is something that I've been looking at recently, just again, because I think we now operate in a world that is complex. And actually, there's so many different parts of the different systems that we're having to work with. So being able to actually look at that in a much more systemic way so that there's a better understanding, you know, what are the people doing? What are the processes that we need? What are the different influences that are going to support that? How can we better join the dots? And I think it's very, very apt for the conversation that we're having today, because it is about those systems and actually not looking at anything in isolation, moving out of those boxes, moving out of those silos, and making sure that we are connecting the different systems, people, processes, so that we can actually get better outcomes. And I think that's what's going to bring better outcomes. On a more fun level, I've started to try my hand at running again. So that's a skill I'm really not good at, but I think it's one that I think will give me the stamina to do and the thinking space to do some other thing that I want to do within my professional life.
Lovely. I love that. Systems thinking and running. Brilliant. Brilliant, Aranola. And it's fantastic to have you on the panel. Kate, if I could pass over to you next.
Of course. Hi, Jessie, and great to be here today. So my role is Social Impact Director at Grosvenor. We're a property company based here in Westminster, primarily in the West End. And across our portfolio, we host around 1,000 businesses, which employ about 50,000 people. As an employer, our direct impact is actually relatively small. We're only about 200 people. But the impact we're trying to have on skills in Westminster is much bigger than that. So through that customer base of 1,000 businesses and the jobs that they host, and then also through our supply chain and the impact that has up and down our supply chain in the sector. So the sort of work we're trying to do in this space includes trying to make the property sector itself more diverse, more accessible. We're also trying to create more attainable entry points for roles in the built environment more broadly, and with a particular focus on green skills there. And also opening up opportunities for local people within our customer base, whether that is in a retail business, in a hotel business, or in some of those more professional services sectors that were touched on earlier in the conversation. One skill I'm working on at work, so I would say this is all about data for us at the moment. So obviously there is so much of it increasingly in our working world. In some respects, we're completely swamped by it, and actually cutting through to find the right data to inform decision making, to use it smartly, to measure the impact of our work, for me personally, to get business buy-in and investment in the types of programs that we're trying to run. So that's something I'm working on, and I think it's quite a good example of a shift in the property sector more broadly that we're seeing. Whereas previously we were recruiting graduate surveyors, we're now recruiting graduate data analysts, and that's seen as a skill that the sector needs much more of, which is quite a marked shift probably from even 5 years ago. So things are changing quickly, and all of us at Grosvenor and me personally have been tasked with really upskilling ourselves on how to work with data.
Thank you, Kate. That's really insightful, and I really recognise your points around the quantity of data available now. That's something presents quite a lot in my work when I'm looking at economic development and using the right level of data. And I've been sort of dipping into ChatGPT and occasionally arguing with ChatGPT when it throws me out the wrong data. Oliver, if I could come to you finally.
Yeah, thanks, Jessie, and lovely to be with everyone this morning. So I work at Pearson, which is a company that most of you will probably know, and if you don't know, I'll explain why you probably know us. And it's because you may have had a visceral reaction at some point to an exam or a qualification or a test point that was a high-stress moment in your life, because we support education and learning through life. So right from school and early years through GCSEs, through A levels, through BTECs, vocational qualifications, apprenticeships. We do the lot, and then into the corporate world we support through skills tech, insights, credentialing, as well as learning itself. So really Pearson offers a route into this type of problem, and I've been lucky enough to be looking at the strategy for our business associated with everything in learning, post institutional learning, but also all the vocational learning side. So this is extremely relevant and prevalent to my heart, and why I stepped up to be part of the board with Jessie as well. My sort of some of what we'll talk about today, really interesting, the skills that people have talked about, and Kate just mentioned the move from the types of employers and the sort of sunset roles to the sunrise roles, and how that's changing, and how our curriculum is going to need to change. So all of these, I think, are really important topics when I think about skill change and career change and job change. When I think about my own skill that I'm looking at, it's actually associated with that and the adoption of AI in different tools and technology, and in my work and in my team's work. So actually, how do we use that better to free up time so we can be more productive? And again, I've spent a lot of time, and Pearson's done a lot of analysis looking at how the impact of technology on work, and actually how that isn't necessarily about replacement, it's about augmentation, and it's about freeing up productivity so we can do more for good. So I'm sure we'll touch on that today as well.
Thank you, Oliver. So that brings us on to just the first part of our panel session, which means I've got a couple of questions that I'm going to field to the panel, and then after that it will give us a chance to open up the floor to questions from the audience. And so I would ask audience if you could begin to think about some of the questions you might want to field. You could put those in the chat box. Michelle is going to help moderate those and bring those up. If the audience are also feeling brave and you'd like to list the skill that you're working on at work in the chat, we'd also be delighted to see that, and that could be our own little mini audit of skills development for this session. So the first question I wanted to pose is really just an open one, which is, what are the challenges to making training more responsive to business needs? And Arunola, if I could start with kind of asking you to respond to that from the position of leading a further education organisation.
Thank you, Jessie.
I know,
and I think it's been alluded to already, and I think Kate said it when she talked about some of the roles that they're now recruiting to. We have what I can only describe as a really rapidly changing labour market, and that poses challenges in terms of us, from a provider perspective, then being able to adapt the offer quickly enough to make sure that the skills that we are actually delivering therefore meet the needs of of businesses. That absolutely is one of the biggest ones there. And then when you think about the employment and skills landscape in terms of how curriculum gets developed, how then that goes through an approval cycle, the time that it actually takes to actually get funding approved for it, that brings another set of challenges for us as providers in terms of how we can ensure that we are making sure that we're meeting the current needs of businesses. We also, unfortunately, and I've been talking about this for the last 20 years, we do have what I would describe as quite a fragmented skills landscape. There are so many different options that are out there that people can use in order to actually get the skills that they need, but actually it's not the most easy to navigate when it comes to whether we're talking about it from a learner or resident perspective to an employer perspective. It's it's even as a professional that works within the sector, sometimes I find it challenging when I'm thinking, well, what funding stream exactly is that? Can we actually fund what that employer is asking for? Are there ways in which we can actually flex it to make sure that we are still complying and complying with the specification that we're looking to deliver? So that is quite a big issue. And I think you mentioned it earlier, there is definitely a mismatch between what we are delivering and what the demands are for, from employers. So I think it's bringing those three aspects together in a much more flexible way. Whilst those are challenges, there have been opportunities as well. And one of the big ones for me in the last probably 3-4 years now, and it was, it all came about, as a result of COVID. I never thought I'd thank COVID for anything, but actually, during COVID, working with the Greater London Authority as one of our, largest funders, the flexibilities that were then introduced that then enabled providers to look at their offer differently, to be able to have those open conversations with employers in a much more proactive way. That enables you to actually then deliver the skills that they're needing, as opposed to actually being restricted to, the qualifications or the funding streams that you have allocated to you. So I think for me, that is definitely one of the biggest challenges, making sure that we're able to respond quickly to those changes. We can have those conversations early enough, and there is flex within the funding system that will therefore enable you to actually deliver what's needed on the ground, but also supporting businesses to think not just about filling immediate vacancies, because that often is the challenge when we're talking to employers, but also supporting them to think a bit more longer term in terms of what does that workforce planning look like, in terms of what do you need this year, what might you need in 3 years' time, what does the projection look like in 5 years' time. And I know that's difficult because of the current economic situation that we're in, but those definitely are some of the key barriers that we've got that we need to actually overcome.
Thank you. And that makes me reflect on Kate. You were talking about the role that Grosvenor is taking with not only your own employees, but through the supply chain. And I wonder if you could say a bit more about how you've worked as an employer in a particular sector to try and help that sector articulate its skills needs.
Yeah, thanks, Jessie. So, yeah, I was just reflecting on what Aaron was saying there. I think it's really interesting. So I'm not sure we're very good as a sector, and I'm sure we're not the only sector who's not very good at actually joining up the skills need at a sector-wide level and having that sort of conversation at scale. So we certainly have conversations with Westminster, we have conversations with other partners, but whether at a sector-wide level, through whether it's an industry body or other mechanism, we're having the right conversations at the right national scale to give the right sort of breadth of view and that long-term view. I'm not sure it's happening as well as it could. But sort of coming more specifically to what we are doing. So, on a very practical level, every year we survey all our supply chain partners. We have hundreds. So every year we ask them, what are your workforce challenges? What skills are you looking for? And we try to see the trends in that where we can. And for example, that has led to the launch of the programme in the last year, which has been all about trying to create entry-level roles in retrofit. We as a business and many others in the property sector have a huge requirement for retrofitting historic properties. The UK has a huge requirement to do that if we're to meet our net zero goals. But our supply chain are quite lacking in the workforce to be able to do that at the pace and scale that's needed. And the challenge with those roles is partly the speed one that was touched on. We need people quickly to deliver at the pace that's needed. And that then leads itself to people who are already qualified and already experienced. It's not creating the right entry-level opportunities for those pathways for people who are only just coming into the labour market. So yeah, a programme we've been focused on with our supply chain this year and various delivery partners is about creating those entry-level roles in retrofit a profession that's not actually that neatly recognised in training provision yet. It's a sort of mismatch of lots of different recognised professions, but trying to create more accessible, immediately attainable opportunities for people with no qualifications to get into a high growth sector like that is something that we're investing in at the moment and trying to build up that scale across the sector to give it the scale it really needs, to sort of help the training providers feed in appropriately around that, and to give our supply chain some confidence in the labour provision that's coming through.
Yeah, and that point around the flexibility, I think, around training provision, it seems to echo through both what you were saying and Aranola was saying. And Anne-Marie, I wanted to kind of ask you, I know you've done a lot of work at the GLA about trying to get more flexibility into the system to kind of make sure that the funding can actually help us match this this meeting between employer needs and skills provision. I wonder if you could say a bit more, I guess, about the challenges about that, and also I know you have done a lot of work in that area on a positive note that's really been referenced by a lot of providers I've come across in London.
Yeah, thanks, Jessie. So I think what we've been trying to do is use the funding that we have in the most flexible way with our providers. Obviously, the biggest barrier to that is that we also get funding in lots of different, pots that all have their own requirements attached, eligibility attached, different ways of reporting and expectations on us that we then have to work with providers and delivery partners to achieve. So I think the biggest barrier has been looking at how we can kind of combine some of those pots, use those pots a lot more flexibly. We're really pleased that the government is now working with us on the introduction of an integrated settlement from April next year that will combine some of those big pots of money, like our Adult Skills Fund, our boot camps money, our free courses for jobs money, into one overall agreement and pillar, as well as looking at kind of how we can support, how we can use that more flexibly, not just around skills, but also around employment support as well. I think there's a lot more work to do on that with government to make sure that it does actually offer the flexibility that we need to be able to really deliver in a different way. But it also provides more certainty around funding, in that we're now talking about a 3-year settlement rather than an annual settlement that will then enable us to give those that we work with more stability as well, and the ability for them to think more longer term about how they deliver skills and employment support. So there are some big changes happening there that we're really excited about, and we hope will make a real difference in London. But in addition to that, I think we're, as I mentioned before, that we're working on our inclusive talent strategy. And a big part of that is really making the employment and skill system a lot more employer-led. And so one of the things that we're looking to introduce as part of that are some new pan-London sector employer boards that bring together key employers in London. So, like, as Kate said, that ability to kind of help shape provision for their sector at a pan-London level, really kind of feeding in insights into their ongoing needs, and as those change quite quickly as the economy changes, and those boards will be also looking for those boards to help deliver the new local skills improvement plan that is going to be refreshed for London from the autumn. So we'll be working with Business London to start looking at what are those overall key skills that we need to be building in London, and how can those employer boards translate translate that into delivery across London and make sure that employers are feeding into that curriculum design and are really helping and hopefully contributing to the resources that are needed to deliver those skills in London as well. So hopefully a lot of change that we'll be able to help bring about in the next couple of years.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. It does remind me there's so much going on that is change in this system, which thank you for summarising that so well. It's sometimes quite difficult to keep tabs on, but it really sits well with our agenda within the borough of how we're trying to make this provision more responsive. So I've just got a final question before I'm going to open it to the floor, which I'm going to ask Oliver on. And Oliver, I'm aware that probably this might be a bit of an unfair question as the chair of a board, because it does actually relate to our board. You've been a really involved board member, and thank you. Alongside myself and Anne-Marie on the board, you've been with us on this journey, trying to bring partners together to make provision more responsive to employer needs. What are your kind of reflections on that journey, and where do you think the board needs to go next?
Well, this was not one of the pre-prepared questions, Jessie. You've thrown me a curveball.
Well, you mentioned Pearson exams. Here I have turned the table.
Perfect. Well, no, look, very, very happy to comment. And I think if I reflect on the journey, I think we, obviously the first time, and as Jeff mentioned, the first time the council had set up anything like this. So there was a little bit of finding our feet to begin with and really understanding our purpose and objectives. We spent a little bit of time around that and making sure we had alignment, which I think was done very well. The thing that and as you know, I'm vocal about throughout is let's make sure we understand what we're going to change. What's the impact we're going to have, and what dial are we trying to move? Because then we can think about and carry our actions back from that outcome, rather than just be a nice group that comes together on a whatever frequency. Actually, what is the outcome we need to achieve, and what's the measure in which we can sort of claim success? And I think this event is a really great milestone for us from a input and a conversation, because we've done the research, we now understand the problem statement we're trying to solve for around better work, fairer work, and also getting the quality of jobs within the sector better. This is, I think, the start of that conversation now with the different stakeholders of employers, providers, citizens, etc., across the and legislators and policymakers across Westminster. And I think, to me, we kind of got to the start line. That sounds a bit strange because we've been doing this for a little while. We've now, I think, got to the start line where we can start making an impact. Until now, I think we've been setting the objective, understanding the problem, and understanding the impact we want to make. I think this is the start of the engagement that allows us to start making real impact. And so that's why I was excited to be part of today. And I think that we've got a really exciting journey ahead of us over the next probably 18 months or 2 years, as we start to see the fruits of the labour and the work and the board's influence across Westminster City Council. I don't know if that's a fair representation, but that's how I feel the journey's been.
Yeah, that feels very fair to me, and I think it's been, as the chair of the board, I think it's been great to have that external perspective that is giving us a focus on outcomes, because I think we've all been part of boards in the past which perhaps haven't always kind of led to concrete outcomes. And I think as a group of individuals, we're all really interested in making tangible difference to businesses, residents, and education organisations within the borough. So,
Jessie, just before you jump into the open question, so I also wanted to raise a point from the previous line of questioning, I thought Ariana's or Kate and Anne-Marie's points were excellent, particularly pace of change and some of the funding changes. The one that I think I wanted to just provide as additive is around perhaps building on the skills fragmentation or the language. If I look at the work I've done over the last 4 or 5 years in skills and understanding skills across businesses and across the country, the thing when we looked at the problem statement associated with helping organizations and people improve skills has been the data is so poor. So if you look at any organization's data, they have great data on financials, on operations, on supply chain, but the data that people have on their human capital, their employees, their workforce, their citizens, and the skills associated with those is actually not that great. And so, statements like, we know more about our employee when we employ them the first day than we do on their last day. And so they're the sorts of things I think could create a very difficult environment for policymakers, for providers, for employers to actually make great human capital decisions. And so we end up using data that is perhaps too big and amorphous. So your highest level of education or your last job title as being the thing that makes a decision on your future. And I think if one of the barriers, as you referenced, to me is about great data that helps supply and demand to get better supply and demand matching around skills. And so rather than saying, I'm an X and define X as whatever you want as a job title, therefore I will always do X or a derivation of X. Actually, what are the skills you get from X? What are the 20, 30, 40 skills you get from X that you can build up in a different way, so you're not X or a derivation of X, you're an A, B, or a C, because that actually allows you to get a different job and perhaps build and develop in a different way. And I think that to me is a really big challenge that we have. Is quite a macro challenge, and I think people like the work we do with the LSIPs and others is a really great way of trying to get a common language, but it's very difficult. And I don't think there's a system out there yet that employers, policymakers, legislators, training providers can use that is common. And so that to me is a fairly major barrier. So sorry, I just wanted to add a little bit on the previous topic.
Yes, I think that's something we've faced as a board and going through the process of trying to gather that data, which resulted in the report that we produced. It was actually quite a difficult process in itself. So I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Michelle, have we got a question from the floor that we could field to the panel?
Hi, Jessie. Yes, we have 2 questions. One of them was asked a while ago, so it may be for Alex. So first question is from Adam Campbell. What sectors will see the most growth in jobs in the next few years within Westminster?
And did you have a second one? And then we'll those both together. Yeah.
And the second one is from Graham Collins. How do we unleash the huge potential of those furthest away from the labour market due to ethnicity, poor health and poor housing? At Paddington Development Trust, we work directly with these communities and achieve great outcomes, but we can and need to do more. How can we collectively join up the system dots to achieve more together?
So if I could come to the question on sectors, first of all, which is a great one. Aranola, do you have a sense of that from the employer needs that you're seeing come through?
We do, but I suppose it depends on the types of employers that you're talking about as well. So large employers in the main have certain needs, and then we've got SMEs whose voice actually probably is not heard as much as we would like. But based on the information that we have on the ground, obviously those entry-level routes are still, there's still quite a high demand there, particularly around retail, hospitality. There's still quite a huge demand. However, the mismatch we have is the desire to be in those sectors with the roles that are available. So there's definitely a job of work that we need to do with that sector as a whole. And I was talking to a couple of hotels just before the summer break. so that there's a better understanding of what that sector actually means, and people don't just see it as, you know, sort of this race to the bottom. It's an entry-level job that is going to be, they're going to be stuck in low-paid work for the rest of their life. But actually being clear about what those progression pathways are within those sectors. The other one that we, you know, we're working quite heavily on at the moment, and we know will impact all sectors, is looking at the issues around low carbon, looking at green skills, and making sure that there's a good understanding within our local communities, but also within our businesses, what that actually means to the sector that they're in, because it's not the same across the board. Obviously, construction, there's a huge part in terms of our urban environment, in terms of how that will impact. But actually, low carbon will affect, and green and sustainability issues affects every sector across the board. So that's definitely one that, you know, we know we're looking at. And then the final one to mention, which has been a challenge for us as an adult education service, is actually how we can maybe tap into the opportunities around life sciences, and the growth that's available within that, and the really good career opportunities that we could be opening up for our residents. But again, we will need to work with the sector to really clearly define what the entry routes in are for that, and then also map out what those progression pathways are, so that we're not just actually cherry picking and taking those who already have those high level qualifications, but actually creating routes in for those who have low skills. And I think the stats that Alex Hill, our chief economist, shared at the start of the session were quite telling when you look at the discrepancies between the differences between the different wards within Westminster, where we have, you know, low skills versus high level skills. So absolutely, you know, low carbon and green, our construction industry, retail and hospitality industry, and life sciences are areas that we really do need to have a focus on.
Thank you, Aranola. And we have more detail also on growth sectors within our skills board research. Oliver, did you want to come in there as well?
Yeah, I was just going to add, we've done quite a lot of work. Again, it's more around the impact of technology than necessarily about economic growth, which is obviously through the report that we can share, and Alex shared information earlier. But the work we've done around the impact of technology says that the areas that are going to be, particularly through AI and the introduction of different forms of AI and large language models, as well as agentic AI, is that the telco, media and technology sector is going to see the greatest increase in roles and jobs as a result of that technology. So again, that's we've got plenty of that in Westminster, so that's probably a good sign. Equally, when we looked at some of the jobs that are most impacted by AI, we saw that, you know, a lot of white collar roles will be impacted by 30% or so from AI versus blue collar, which is less than 1%. So again, in terms of the impact of that type of technology on the type of roles, may not always be sectors, but you can see how certain roles align to certain sectors. There's sort of a couple of interesting stats that I think we found in our research.
Thank you. And on the question we had around diversity of employment, and also getting people into employment who are further away, quite frankly, from those opportunities. Kate, I don't know if you had a reflection as an employer about the way in which employers can really kind of work on this agenda.
Yeah, a couple of reflections there. Thanks, Jessie. So I think sort of something that, you know, is key is flexibility, and, you know, we sort of have really worked on stripping back the requirements we've had for people applying for Grosvenor in recent years, and really taking it back to the absolute bare minimum and try to create more flexible, accessible pathways. So instead of a formal graduate programme, and I thought it was quite an interesting stat that I think Alex shared at the beginning on how those were dropping off. I know at Grosvenor we have reined back our graduate programmes because we've been prioritising more accessible entry routes like internships and apprenticeships. So I don't know to what extent that factors into those stats. So trying to be flexible in what you really need, and recognizing the barriers people face to the more typical pathways. And then something sort of from a more community perspective, that our delivery partner always has been really great at sort of bringing to life for us on our Roots into Retrofit programme, is what they refer to as a work first approach. And the feeling that often for people furthest from the labour market, all the talk about skills and formal pathways and qualifications can in itself be too much and really off-putting. And the first thing a lot of people need is just a flexible way into the labour market, into work. And then the skills can be packaged around that in a way that suits their life circumstances and barriers to work, and confidence is then built up through that process. And we've had some great successes with a couple of people that just would not have got a foot in the door if it was for an apprenticeship, if it was for a more formal role, but by taking a really gradual supported employment approach to their first 6 months, they've then been able to go on and pursue those opportunities. So yeah, that recognition that for some people, just the foot in the door to the labour market is the right thing, and then bolting on training and skills around that, I think is important for employees to recognise as well.
Thank you, Kate. Right, I'm conscious of time. Unfortunately, I think I need to draw the panel session to a close, or I'll be getting a lot of feedback on my skills of timekeeping as a panel chair. So I know we probably had a lot of questions that we didn't answer due to time, but we will keep a record of those, and perhaps Michelle, as follow up to the event, we can get some answers on those, particularly if there's key themes. But Michelle, if I could hand back to you for the next session, and just extend my thanks to such a wise and thoughtful and reflective panel. It was a pleasure to chair this session today. Michelle.
Great, Jessie, thank you very much. And yes, we have received quite a few questions, which we will be responding in detail when we do send a follow-up. With time in mind, I would like now to pass on to Professor Alex Hughes, one of our board members, who will be introducing the next session.
Thanks very much, Michelle. I think that what we've just heard is a fantastic context for what we're coming into. This section of the programme is the Industry Spotlight section, and we have experts from 2 key sectors for Westminster, the creative sector and the hospitality sector. From the creative sector, we have Sarah Gregory, who is head of EDI at Creative UK. And from the hospitality sector, we have Sandra Kelly, Skills Director at UK Hospitality. Each of our speakers is going to speak for 5 minutes on issues of challenge and issues of good practice. Then we'll have time for a Q&A. Again, Michelle, if you can keep an eye on questions in the chat, please, that would be fantastic. But without further ado, let's get going. And I'm going to hand over first to Sandra to speak. Welcome, Sandra, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm delighted to be here with you this morning. So I'm going to talk to you about the hospitality industry. Hospitality is the cornerstone of the UK economy. We contribute £140 billion in economic activity. We employ 3.5 million people directly. If you add our supply chain into the mix, we employ over 6 million people. We contribute £54 billion in taxes, and we invest £7 billion in local activities and communities on an annual basis. So hospitality is a unique industry. We create places where people want to live, where they want to work, and where they want to invest. One of our biggest challenges is we're not in the government's industrial strategy. We're not part of the 8 sectors or the 2 industry priorities in construction, adult and social healthcare. However, the government recognises that hospitality is essential, not just to the large construction contracts, which include hospitality and catering, but also to high street regeneration. Hospitality is essential to the NEAT challenge. We're the highest employer of under 30s. There are no barriers to entry, no barriers to progression. we are also an essential industry to support welfare to work. And we created a solution, which is a new universal entry standard, which touches on a lot of what the panel was just talking about. So for the hospitality industry, this new universal entry standard, the content of which we've taken the level 2 skills, knowledge and behaviours from the apprenticeships in hospitality and catering, and we stripped them back down to entry level. We've also added into this programme 6 essential employment skills and some of the other core component parts that are a part of an induction into any role in hospitality and catering. We've created a digital hospitality skills passport, and we've been asked to integrate this into the sector-based work academy programmes to support DWP. We've actually been asked to roll this programme out across 26 regions in England as a really structured way to get people into work. We've integrated the specification of this programme also into skills bootcamps in other areas, and we've integrated them into the new apprenticeship standards at level 2. We work closely with OCN London as an awardee organisation to create this specification so that we've got consistent learning outcomes, we've got really strong external quality assurance, and the whole programme has been employer-led. We have worked really closely with Capital City College Group in Westminster specifically, and I'm delighted to share with the audience today that it was at that Westminster campus that we launched this programme on the 29th of April. So we're live across London, we're live across Kent and Blackpool, and soon Coventry, Scarborough, Torbay and other areas. But I wanted to focus on this because Westminster is clearly leading the way here. More employers are needed to support the programme, and hospitality is just a huge movement now across the country, focusing on this new universal entry standard with the hospitality skills passport, which is something that you get in a digital format. It goes into your Google or your Apple wallet, and when you click on the QR code, it takes you to your certificate, and then it lists your learning outcomes. I was interviewed by FE Weekly recently, and the journalist said, what you've created here is a very structured way for somebody who's new to the industry to be able to work with an employer in an interview to share with them what they've just been doing over the last month. It's a ready-made CV, it's highly relevant, and it's supporting people getting into the entry-level jobs. There are so many entry-level jobs within hospitality and catering, and you can stay in that entry-level job if that suits you. But 90% don't stay in that entry-level job. They move on into a level 2 position, into a level 3 position, into management and beyond. So there you are. Whistle stop tour, 5 minutes, a sector view, an industry spotlight on hospitality.
Thank you so much, Sandra, and thank you for something that actually illustrated some responses to some of the issues and questions that came up in the last session. Sarah, over to you.
Morning all. Sorry, Mike refusing to behave itself. Can I share 4 slides very quickly? If it doesn't work, it's fine. I can do with or without. I'll try and share them if they work. It's nice to have a little.
Yes, go ahead.
A little visualization. Always nice. Let's see if we can actually get this to work.
Yeah, we can see them. Oh, can we? Yes, here we go.
Yes, you've got them. Good, you got a front cover, creating authentically dubbed. So I got asked to speak about a slightly different thing. So I'm Sarah Gregory, I'm head of EDI at Creative UK, and we are a sector-wide body that supports the entirety of the creative and cultural sector in the UK. We do lots of very interesting things, everything from policy and advocacy, which is where my role sits. My role is an outward-facing role. All the way through to investment directly in creative businesses to grow. But the very bulk of what we do in the middle of that, I guess, is really about trying to grow and develop creative businesses across the UK to ensure that we have a vibrant sector. As the previous speaker did, I'll give a very, very brief encapsulation of our sector, just in case you don't understand, because many people don't. So we are worth about £126 billion to the UK economy. That's roughly 5% of GDP. Jobs wise, we have 2 million jobs directly in the sector, and that's everything from, of course, the very obvious creative roles, but through to everything from technical, administrative, even through to care roles. I mean, literally every role exists within the creative industries. But also there are a million additional creative roles out in the wider economy. Think graphic designers in banks, think marketing managers in, your average, average company across the UK. So creative roles are a really, really important part of the UK economy. We are delighted to be a sector that is in the Industrial Strategy 8. We have been picked out as a high growth sector. The reason for that is quite simple. We have outperformed the UK GDP by doubling it for at least the past 10 years, potentially longer. So we definitely are a high growth sector. We're very pleased to have been recognised as that. However, we definitely do have skills gaps, shortages, and we unfortunately also do have many, many barriers to entry and to progression. A couple of simple stats on that, just to throw to you: 56% of the creative industries is predicated by somebody who was privately educated versus just 7% of the UK. And 76% of us have a degree, which is completely unnecessary if you're a camera operator or a runner, let's face it. So, but today I'm really going to focus in a little bit more on the subject that I was asked to speak about, which was creating authentically diverse workplaces within the creative and cultural industries. So for me, 3 key factors. So I'm going to try and keep to 5 minutes. So 3 key factors: leadership, pathways and progression, and multivariance. So leadership. Our sector needs authentically diverse leadership in creative workplaces because we need it across both the strategic and the creative outputs that we're doing. The reason we need that is really key for our sector. We need it because it is proven to increase creativity and innovation. It makes better products and services, and I'll circle back on that momentarily. It helps us to reach new markets and grow our audiences. It increases our social and economic value and ensures the sector's growth and sustainability. And for our workforce, it also means happier, more productive, more fulfilled, and a longer serving workforce. Just to circle back on the things I wanted to circle back on, so making better products and services. Why does diversity even matter in that? I'm just going to give a couple of nice examples, or a nice example from just the last few weeks. Swatch in China put out a most inappropriate advert because they didn't have anybody culturally appropriate advising them on their marketing strategy. It lost them 11% of global sales overnight, mostly driven by a downturn in China. So in a fully universal marketplace, we need businesses and workplaces that understand the full breadth of the people that they're trying to reach. We also know that diverse audiences are underserved massively across the creative and cultural industries. So disabled people, people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, and people from ethnic minorities are not the people you're going to find in your museums, galleries, theatres, etc. So if we want to grow the sector, we need to think more diversely. Number 2, please go forwards. You need to go forwards. I might have to do it on here. Yes. Pathways and progression. So we need, as a sector, to establish clear pathways both into and through industry. Currently, as an industry, we are heavily networked and completely opaque. The learning and development needs to be sensitive and relevant to a diverse workforce needs. It is not going to be a one-size-fits-all. Really important for us, we need development beyond entry to support the whole career journey. We need our pathways and our skills mapping and making clear to people so they understand how to get in and through. We need much improved monitoring and data sharing about those pathways and progression routes from people. We've started that. We have launching today, hopefully tomorrow, if it doesn't go out today, a new report on leadership diversity in the creative and cultural industries, which we hope will begin this process. And we also need diversity to be built into succession. So people are thinking about that. Someone earlier was talking about thinking about their workforce 5 and 10 years in advance. Well, we need to be thinking about how we build diversity into that succession plan with that kind of leading. And my last point would also be around multivariance. So EDI and company culture in the creative and cultural industries, really, really importantly, but actually elsewhere across the economy, needs to move beyond identity and demographics to better appreciate individual characteristics and serve the needs of all creators, workers, and potential audience members. It is not a one-size-fits-all for anybody, and it matters because technology is already capable of serving individual needs. We each get fed exactly what an algorithm tells us we're already liking. This means audiences are shrinking across pretty much every kind of creative, cultural media outlet. This will only increase. So unless as businesses, as managers, as leaders, we are recognizing and meeting the needs of both all of our staff members, and that's all of our staff members, but also all of our customers and all of our audience members, we are absolutely all doomed to fail. Sorry to end on a sad point. Any questions, comments and concerns, happy to share. Steer you to our website. We have a wonderful resource called Create Diversity. You can find loads and loads, 60, 70 case studies around how diversity does work in the creative industries, and we're always inviting new ones. So if you want to learn a little bit about how to make diversity work in a creative company, give Create Diversity a visit. And that's it for me. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Sandra. I think that was an incredibly helpful session, because what it brought out was how in key sectors accessible, inclusive workplaces can be created, how employers need to create them, and how employers can work with training providers to create them. So I think you really, with a very specific industry focus, picked up on a bunch of themes that came out very strongly in our first session, which is wonderful. Michelle, do we have questions from the audience? And have we got time for questions from the audience?
We don't at the moment.
We don't. Well, in that case, since we are running a little bit behind, I will spare you my 3 or 4 questions, because I think they've been picked up elsewhere anyway. And once again, thank you to our 2 speakers for a fantastic and insightful session. And I'd like to hand back to Councillor Barraclough for his closing remarks.
Thanks, Alex. That was terrific, and you get a gold star for sticking to time as well, because I promised everybody we'd be done in 90 minutes. So I will be very brief as well. Fascinating morning, lots to chew on. I'm particularly pleased that we're now talking about action, because we need to deliver for our communities and for our employers, and I'm keen that we deliver for people who are a long way from the labour market, but I'm also keen that we deliver for people who are currently in the labour market, working hard on minimum wage and deserve, want a promotion and a career. And with that, just like to thank Alex, like to thank Jessie and the panel members and the sector representatives. Thank you all for attending. We're going to have an interactive session in November, face-to-face, with some roundtables and networking, so we can all meet each other and have a deeper discussion. And importantly, between now and then, if you're involved with skills in Westminster as an employer, as a voluntary organisation, as a training provider, and you see benefit in the network the council has put together, because we now have reach into the community, we have reach into employers, we have reach into training providers, we can make things work. Please get in touch with Michelle and the team, and we will be delighted to work with you. So with that, I'd just like to thank you all, and listen, have a great day.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everyone. I am putting the email in the chat, so if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can. You will also receive a follow-up from the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you. Bye.